Okay, so I don't know how much Lisa and MJ have shared, but my name is Zena Kumak, and I am a personal finance educator, writer, speaker, and I'm here to give you guys a very basic understanding of personal finance. Hats off to everyone who filled out my survey. There were a lot of really good questions in there. I don't know if I'm going to have time to delve into everything today, but I'm going to send along some resources after the fact, and then, of course, y'all can always email me. And I'm going to try to speed through my presentation, and then we're going to have Q&A at the end. So if you can just hold on to your questions at the end, because I might answer them later. And yeah, and then if we run out of time, again, you can always shoot me an email. So this is Financial Wellness 101, and I like to think of it as the same way that you would care about your mental health or your physical health, we all have financial health. And unfortunately, no one really teaches personal finance in schools, and a lot of people's parents don't talk about it because money is so taboo. So what I want to start off with saying is there's no such thing as a stupid question. Again, I've heard from so many people that just graduate and they don't really know how credit works or how money works or how investing works, and don't feel bad about that because I've heard from so few parents that have actually said, oh yeah, I did sit down and teach my child everything. And again, schools don't really teach this, although I think Indiana's gonna start next year, soon, which is awesome. There aren't that many states in the country that do that, so that's kind of exciting. So whatever question you have, I also promise if you're thinking it, there's probably someone else in the room who's thinking it, so don't feel bad. Okay, so this is my background. I've been writing about personal finance for about 10 years, and I went to IU, graduated with a journalism degree. That's where I met MJ. And I started blogging about trying to pay off my student loans and trying to figure out personal finance on my own. And it was kind of writing about it helped me figure out how I was dealing with it, how I was thinking about it. And it also, I feel like it was just something I was doing to keep myself accountable, because in college I was spending money left and right, and it was just really easy to do and just feeling like I had no responsibilities. And then once I graduated and started working at a newspaper and started paying back my student loans, I really started feeling the pressure of oh crap, there is a very limited amount of money coming in, not to scare y'all, and there are a lot of expenses, and I had to figure out my money if I didn't want to get into credit card debt. So I really learned about this stuff the hard way. My parents were pretty good about talking about personal finance, but it's one thing to be 16 and someone telling you what a budget is, and it's another thing to be 22 and living on your own and having to figure stuff out so you don't end up asking your parents for help. So those are some of my bylines. So financial wellness to me really just means that what you want out of life and what your goals are, what your dreams are, it really aligns with how you're spending and managing money. So it's kind of like if you want to run a 5K in 20 minutes, then you have to go out and run most days of the week. And financial wellness is the same kind of principle. If you want to retire, if you want to go on vacation, if you want to buy a house, if you want to feel financially stable, if you want to live in New York on a journalist salary, you need to have some basic financial principles in place to do that. And I always like to say financial wellness starts with financial awareness. And awareness just means knowing what's going on with your money right now. So that might mean on a basic level, how much do I have in my checking account, in my savings account? But it can also mean other things like how much do I have in student loans? What's my interest rate? How much do I have in my investments? Am I on track for retirement? It really just means knowing a few basic things about your money. And you guys, I've done this presentation for people a little bit older, but if you don't feel financially aware, you're not alone. According to the survey from Mint, 65% of Americans don't know how much money they spent last month. And I'm guessing that if they don't know how much money they spent, they probably don't know how much money they have, how much they owe, what their credit score is. So this is a national problem for most of us. Again, like, we don't learn about this at school or at home, so we get out in the real world and most of us still don't really know what we're doing, so don't feel bad. So this is kind of the basics of what you should know to be financially aware. Your income, your gross and your net. So gross is your income before taxes and deductions have been taken out, and net is what is the amount of money that actually hits your bank account on payday. So most of us, if you're working like a traditional W-2 job, you're gonna have payroll taxes taken out, you're probably gonna have health insurance taken out, you might have retirement contributions taken out. But if you're a freelancer like me, then you're not gonna have any of those things taken out, and then what you earn is just gonna be like that net salary. And I think for most of us, if you've ever had a real paycheck in your life, you know that the amount of money you think you earn versus the amount that actually hits your checking account is very different. I think that's a really stark realization for a lot of us. But it's important to know both, and it's important to know what those deductions are, like what's actually coming out of your paycheck. Your credit score, I like to think of as like a financial GPA. Your credit score really reflects how you are as a borrower. Like, do you pay money back on time? Do you spend a lot of money on credit cards? Is there a high balance on those cards? Credit scores don't reflect your saving habits. So if you're really good at saving money, investing money, that is not reflected in your credit score. But it's a really good gauge for a lender to use to decide, okay, should I lend you money? And if I lend you money, are you gonna be a risky borrower? Are you gonna actually pay me back? Credit scores are really important also in a lot of different ways. Car insurance companies can use credit scores to determine how much to charge you, because there's some data showing that if you're a risky borrower, maybe you're also a risky driver. And even landlords will use information from your credit score to determine if you're a reliable person. Are you gonna keep their apartment clean? So I know there's like a big Dave Ramsey camp that says credit scores don't matter, but they really do for all intents and purposes. Like, unless you're a millionaire and you can just finance everything yourselves, credit scores are really important. And if you have student loans, as soon as you start paying them back, you start paying them back on time every month, your credit score will improve. So that's a good thing, is like, you can start working on your credit score pretty quickly. You should also know roughly how much you're spending every month, and that amount will differ. Like, I see so many people say like, but it changes every month. That is totally normal, it makes sense. Like, what you spend on July when you go on vacation is different than what you spend in September when you're staying at home. And it's also different than what you're spending in December on Christmas and holiday travel and all that. But you should have an idea of what you're spending on the things that really don't change, like rent, gas, groceries, utilities, streaming, internet, all those kinds of things. You should also roughly know how much you owe. I know that gets really scary for some people, especially if you've never really looked at how much you owe. Like, I've had so many friends who said, I didn't know how much I took out in student loans. My parents helped me borrow the money, and then I just didn't worry about it. And I think it's really scary for a lot of people to look at that number, but they say ignorance is bliss. I'm not sure if that's true with personal finance, because there's always that nagging feeling in the back of your head of, okay, am I actually handling my money correctly? Am I actually, like, what do I owe? So if you have student loans, it should be pretty easy to look up how much you owe, what the interest rate is, what your monthly payment will be. And you should also ideally know, if you are investing, how much you have invested, what you're invested in, what kind of accounts you have. So this is just kind of the baseline information. I know I've thrown like a lot of stuff at you, so we're gonna break it down. So to build financial awareness, you can start by just logging onto your bank account and seeing, okay, how much money is in there? What am I spending my money on? There are tons of great budgeting apps and services out there. Some of them are free, some of them have like a small fee, so there are options. I really like Monarch and Tiller, those are my two favorite. There is like a really big cult following around you need a budget. And all of those cost money, but all of them have a trial, so you can download it and see how you like it. You can also use your own spreadsheet. I've seen some people who really like bullet journaling, they'll just get out like a notebook and paper. So what I always tell people is budgeting is kind of like working out. If you don't like budgeting, maybe you haven't found a service that really appeals to you. And it's also like working out that you might not ever feel like doing it, but it's really good for you in the long run. I also really encourage people to look at how much they're spending on things like subscriptions and recurring services. That's something that I see in people I talk to that they just don't really know how much they're spending on that stuff regularly. Like little things that can add up a lot. And it's just helpful to know like, okay, how much am I spending on Netflix and Spotify and Disney Plus, and am I actually getting that much value out of it? Especially because those things are pretty easy to cancel and start back up again, so you can, cancel as you need to. So your credit score, it's really easy to check your credit score for free. That didn't used to do these. So Credit Karma is a free service, and that's what I usually recommend to beginners. But also a lot of banks and credit card companies will show you your credit score for free, like Chase, Discover, American Express, maybe even Wells Fargo. They'll show you your credit score, so you might have to like scroll down. Like if you got Chase, you just have to scroll down when you log in, and that's also really helpful. Another thing is, and this is kind of the fun part of financial awareness, is figuring out what your goals are and how to build those into your budget. So for some of you, that might be, I want to move out of my parents' house when I graduate. Okay, how much money am I going to need for a security deposit, furniture, stuff like that? It might be, I'm getting a new job and I know I might have to move across the country. What do those moving expenses look like? It might be, I've got a friend's wedding next year and I know I'm going to have to pay for a bachelorette party. I know I'm going to have to pay for that flight. At least I feel like when I was 23, that was everything that came up. I see, yeah, thanks, MJ. And later on, it might be, I want to buy a house. How do I save for that? How do I start saving for retirement? I always tell people, everyone thinks, I shouldn't say everyone, a lot of people will come to me and say, like, I know I'm not spending that much money, but I don't know where it's all going. And it's kind of like, if you don't know where it's going, your estimate is probably off. I've coached so many people who've said, I really don't want to spend that much money. But when we go through, it's like all these Amazon purchases or subscriptions, like it's kind of like a leaky faucet. You might not think the drop is that big, but when it adds up over weeks and months and years, it can add up to a lot of money. And that's true for everyone. Like money just adds up so quickly, and unless you're like really tracking it and you just know where it's going, then it's easy to just spend more than you think you have. There's also the emotional aspect of financial awareness, which I think a lot of people don't talk about. There's so much shame around money, and a lot of that comes from shame from feeling like you don't know what you're supposed to know, or shame from I've taken out more in student loans than I realized, or I have credit card debt, or I don't have as much in savings as I think I should. That is perfectly normal. Like everyone I've coached people who are making six figures who have financial shame and guilt, and I've coached people who are living paycheck to paycheck. And part of it is just that when you think you're supposed to be at a different place and just feeling guilty for not having gotten there already, again, that is totally normal, and I think it's also easy to compare yourself with other people. Like if you have classmates whose parents maybe paid for more of their college, or maybe they happen to get a full ride, or maybe they landed a really great job after graduation and they're just doing so much better. Like all of that is, I see a lot of nodding, which is good. All that is perfectly normal, and it's important to realize that, like, you don't have to feel bad about where you are. Like, there's not a moral judgment if you have more debt than other people, if you're not making as much as other people. There are so many social and political factors that go into personal finance that a lot of people don't acknowledge, and it's just really important to keep that in mind. Like, what income your parents have is not your fault or responsibility, but it has a huge impact on what kind of life you have, what kind of debt you have. So those are all important things to consider. So this process is usually really, it's a little scary for people, and it's a little emotionally taxing because there's just so much baggage and there's so much knowledge and so much stuff that you don't know. So I like to tell people, like, don't try to figure this all out in one day or a week. Just take it slow and just almost adopt the attitude of, like, I want to be aware of my money, and maybe that's going to be an uncomfortable process, but hopefully it'll help me to get to a better place than where I am now. Okay, so first off, what is a budget? I think a lot of you mentioned you wanted to discuss budgets. A budget is basically, I think, like to think of it as like a roadmap. Most people hate budgets because they think of it like a diet, and a diet is something horrible. And it basically tells you, like, you can't eat this, you can't eat this. When I coach people, I don't want budgeting to feel like a diet. I want it to feel like a GPS, and I want it to feel like, okay, if you want to get to a place where you can say yes to your best friend's wedding, or yes to going on vacation next year, then you kind of have to know, like, okay, where's my money going? And it's all about making a decision of, like, well, I really want this thing, so I'm going to spend less on this. And having, like, the agency and making that choice of, okay, I can't do both things because money is finite, so I'm gonna choose to do this thing. Or it's about saying, you know what, I could afford to go on vacation, but I also really want to live in an apartment without roommates. So I'm going to do that instead because that's a better choice for me. So it's just recognizing, like, your money is finite and you have to make some uncomfortable choices sometimes. And I also like to tell people, you know how someone might say, like, oh, I can't afford that. Sometimes it's not about I can't afford it, it's, well, I could afford it, but I don't want to. And I'm choosing to do something else. And I think budgeting really gives you the power to say, like, I know what's going on with my money, and I know how much I can afford to do, and I know what I want to do, and really making sure your budget aligns with just how you want to live your life. I think there's a lot of frustration when your budget and your spending doesn't align with how you want to live. And that might mean, like, well, I want to go on vacation, but I'm not spending my money in a way that I can afford to go. And that's where I think people get frustrated with budgeting, because it's just, they're not getting to where they want to be. Okay, so this was another big topic that a lot of people said they wanted to talk about, and I'm really glad, because I think investing is, like, if you come away with anything from today, I want you to come away with a basic idea of how investing works. Have any of you started investing yet? No? That's okay. In a very basic sense, investing just means putting money in something now and then hoping that when you need it later, it will have grown in value. So you might invest money in a business, you might invest money in maybe like a rental property. But for most people, the most accessible and easiest way to start investing is in the stock market. So companies that are publicly traded, they let you buy shares of stock in them. And a share is basically like having a little piece of ownership in a company. And it just means that when the company does well, your shares will do well. So when the company is successful, then your stocks will be successful. And why investing is so important is basically because we don't really have, like, we have Social Security in this country, but as you've probably heard, there are some changes that mean it may not be around as much for your generation and maybe even for my generation as our parents. And also, Social Security it probably won't cover all of your expenses in retirement. And that's why a lot of people, they might be able to take Social Security, but they also might have to keep working. Or they might have to go live with their kids. They might have to really downgrade their lifestyle. So the reason you have to care about investing is that investing now and putting money away when you're young and healthy and able is really the only way that you'll ever be able to stop working when you want to later on. And that's really because the money that grows in the stock market grows at a faster rate than money you put in a savings account. So a lot of people might think okay, I'm saving money and I'm putting it in a savings account. But unfortunately, the money in a savings account, it doesn't grow enough to compete with the rate of inflation. I feel like in the last couple of years, inflation has been a really hot topic. Normally, inflation is really steady, it's pretty low. But when inflation is low, it means the rate you'll get from your savings account is also low. So that money you have in a savings account might actually be worth less next year than it is this year. And that's where investing comes in. Hopefully, if you invest correctly and consistently over a period of time, your investments will grow more than the rate of inflation. So the money that you have today will be worth more in the long run, and hopefully when you're ready to retire, it'll be enough that you can live on it. So there are lots of ways you can invest, but we're just going to talk about the basics. There's a 401k and an IRA. So a 401k is only offered by your employer, and it's only offered really if you're a W-2 employee or you're a traditional employee, you're not a freelancer. And what's great about a 401k is that a lot of companies might also contribute to your 401k. It's like a benefit that they'll use to incentivize you. And also, the 401ks have a really, really, really high annual maximum limit. I think it's like $25,000 roughly for this year. So most people don't hit it. That's totally fine. But it's also really great because there's a really high maximum limit for the employer. So if you do work at a company that is a really generous 401k program, then you might be able to, get as much out of it as possible. IRAs are also a really popular retirement investment vehicle. If you're a freelancer like me, or you're self-employed, you're 1099, you can't open a 401k. It's only offered by employers, but you can open an IRA. And IRAs are just as good. I actually think they're better. An IRA you can open at any point as long as you have earned income. I think I opened mine when I was a junior in college and put like $500 in there. So as long as you have earned money, and that's earned from a job. So if your grandma dies and leaves you some money, you can't put that money in an IRA. But if you have an internship that's paid, if you work part-time at the bookstore, any kind of job, you can put that money in an IRA. There are two subtypes within both 401ks and IRAs. They are Roth and traditional. And I know I'm getting down in the weeds here, so just if you have any questions, just let me know for later. When you have a traditional 401k or a traditional IRA, the money that you put in, you can deduct it on your taxes later on. If you have a Roth IRA, you can't do that. But later on in retirement, when you start taking money out of your retirement account, if you have a Roth IRA or a Roth 401k, that money will not be taxed as income. So what I like to tell people, it's a very, very basic general rule of thumb, and none of this is specific investment advice. If you're young, a Roth 401k or Roth IRA is great because you're probably in a lower tax bracket now than you will be in retirement. If you're older, if you're self-employed, a traditional retirement account is great because you can deduct that money on your taxes. Again, those are very basic, rules of thumb. And I'm legally not allowed to give specific investment advice to any of you, but that's just a general baseline. And I feel like this might come up. You can have a 401k and an IRA at the same time. What a lot of people might do is they might have a 401k just because their employer offers a match, and that's great. And they might contribute enough to get that match. And then they might also have an IRA because you have more freedom in what you can invest in with an IRA, and there might be lower fees with an IRA. So that's also really helpful. But you can have both. Okay. A very, very basic rule of thumb is that you can, I don't want to say should, I don't like to use should when I talk about money, but a good idea is to save between 10 and 15% of your income for retirement every year. I know that sounds like a lot of money, and I also want to reiterate, if you can't do 10 and 50%, and I couldn't either when I first graduated, it took me a while to build up to that, that is okay. It is better to do 1%, 2%, even like whatever little you can do is better than nothing. Because part of investing or any kind of financial habit is just getting into the habit of it. So if you can live without 1% of your salary, 2%, then when you start making more money, let's say you get a raise, maybe you live with a roommate or a boyfriend and your expenses decrease, then when you have more money, you can see, okay, well, I'm gonna add that to my retirement. So it's really just about how soon can you build up to saving 10 to 15%. So, and again, saving 1% is better than nothing. I know that sounds like peanuts, but I promise that's where I started. And a lot of it is just getting into the habit and also getting the benefits of compound interest, which I'll discuss in the next slide. I also want to explain, when you open your 401k or your IRA, the most important thing you have to do is to choose what you want to invest in. So when you open a savings account, you just put your money there and the bank has an interest rate and it pays you that interest. That's not how it works with a 401k or an IRA or any investment account. You have to select the investments. This is actually probably one of the biggest mistakes I've seen people make. I heard about a woman who had opened a 401k, she had been putting money in it for years, and she had done the math and said, okay, if I put in X amount of money for 40 years, I'll be able to retire. She never really checked her account and discovered when she was at retirement age that she had never actually invested the money in the account. It had just sat there in like the savings account portion. So I had never benefited from the gains of investing. So it's kind of like how I describe it is, if you have a crock pot and you turn it on, if you don't put any food in there, you're not going to have a meal at the end of the day. So opening a 401k or an IRA is like plugging in the crock pot, but choosing your investments is like putting your ingredients in. So you have to pick the ingredients to actually see the gains investing. Yeah.
I have a question about 401k. Is it something where because if it's offered by your employer, you get a job, you open it. If you get a different job, how does that work?
So that's a really good question. If you have a 401k, let's say you're working at the Indy Star and you have a 401k there. If you move to, let's say you get a job at New York Times, you can technically, it depends on how much money you have in that 401k. What I suggest most people do is that you roll over that 401k into a new IRA. If you already have an existing IRA, you can just move it over there. I think sometimes you can move it over to your new 401k at like your new employer, but I tell people not to do that because 401ks usually give you like a limited amount of investing options, and they often have higher fees than IRAs. So it's usually a better option to take that 401k and roll it over to an IRA. It is fairly simple to do this. I've done this a couple of times. It's a fairly straightforward process. You just contact, like let's say your 401k provider is Fidelity. You just call them up and say, hey, I want to move it. Sometimes they send you a check and you'll have to deposit that check into your new IRA. Sometimes they can do it automatically, like account to account. So it really just depends, but it's a pretty straightforward process. You don't want to leave that money in your old 401k because sometimes companies will charge you a higher fee if you're no longer an employee and you still have a 401k there. Sometimes you have less than a certain amount, they'll automatically close out the 401k and send you a check. So it's always best to take that money with you, but that's a really good question. So yeah, I just want to add, like, not picking investments in your retirement account is really one of the worst mistakes you can make. I've just seen so many people who have put money in but not actually selected an investment. They haven't picked like a mutual fund or a stock or an index fund, and that money just hasn't grown. It's really, really devastating, especially if you do it for decades, like that example. So I'm gonna split up investing based on what kind of employee you are, because that really depends. It really changes like what you can do. So if you're traditionally employed, like you're a full-time W-2 employee, your options are usually 401k, but sometimes 403b, especially if you're working for a nonprofit or like teachers, I think usually have 403bs. So if you're eligible, your employer might match your contributions. What that means is they might say, hey, if you contribute a certain percentage of your salary, we will match that. Now, they may match it 100%, they may match it 50%. Those are usually the two most popular options. So what that means, if you're earning $35,000, a lot, okay, here's a better example. There is a limit of how much your salary they will match, usually. I've seen 6% is like the most common. It might be lower depending on where you work. So let's say you're earning $35,000 and the limit is 6%. So if you contribute 6% of your salary and your employer matches 100% of those contributions, that means they'll match 6% of your salary. But if you only contribute 5%, then they'll match 5%. And if they only match 50% of contributions, then if you contribute 6, they'll contribute 3. I know I just threw a lot of math. Does that make sense? Okay, sweet. A lot of times you have to work there for a certain period of time to be eligible for the 401k. That might be like 6 months, a year. But I always try to tell people, a match is free money. It is so important to contribute the maximum amount to get as much of the match as possible. So just do whatever you can to get as much of that money as possible. It's like one of the only ways to get free money, and also it's a huge part of your benefits package. So when they're calculating like, hey, this is your salary, and here's how much health insurance you'll qualify for, and here's how much PTO you get. Your 401k match is a huge part of your total compensation package. And a lot of companies will use a really good 401k matching program as an excuse to pay you less. So it's really good to take advantage of the 401k matching. And I'm saying that as someone who works for myself and I have no one to match my 401k. So if you do have a really good 401k program, that's like worth its weight in gold. Okay, if you're self-employed, if you're a freelancer, if you're a 1099, this is what you can do. So it's important to still save for retirement when you're self-employed. It's actually even more important because there is no 401k. So what you can do is open an IRA. The IRA has a lower annual limit than a 401k, but it's still decent. And if you max it out or get close to maxing out, you can still have a really, really nice nest egg for retirement. So for 2024, the maximum annual contribution is $7,000 or $8,000 if you're 15 or older. And you can open an IRA like almost anywhere you want. I really like Fidelity and Charles Schwab. They have low fees. Their customer service is really good. They have a really nice chat function, which I like because I don't like to talk to people on the phone. I legally can't offer specific investing advice. So if you ask me, hey, what index funds should I invest in? not legally allowed to do that, but I will be offering some very general investing advice on the next slide. Okay, so much smarter people than me have come up with a really basic, really popular 3-fund strategy. So when you invest, you want to make sure that your accounts are diversified. What that means is you're not putting all your eggs in one basket. So what is diversification? Putting all of your money in Tesla, Apple, Microsoft, that's not diversification. Even if you put your money in 3 of those, because they're all tech stocks, they will all be affected by the same general things in the market. The best way to invest, I'm trying to pick my words carefully so no one sues me. The best way to invest, in my opinion, is with an index fund. So when people talk about the stock market's doing really well or the stock market had a bad day, often what they're talking about is something called the S&P 500, which are the 500 biggest companies in America, and probably the world. So the S&P 500 is basically looks at what are those top 500 companies and how are they doing, and that's what people use as like the baseline for the stock market. If you can track the index and with your investments, you will be doing great. There's a phrase saying you can't beat the market, but you can track the market. Basically, no one can beat the market, and if they can, they're probably only beating it for a really short period of time. And if they say they can beat the market, they're probably going to charge you a really high fee that will take up so much of your money that you are not better off. But what you can do, and this is honestly like, again, if you take away like anything from today, you can invest solely in index funds and if you save enough, you will have a really great nest egg for retirement. So this is a 3-fund strategy that a lot of people, again, much smarter than me, have come up with. So for people who are young and investing aggressively, which is appropriate for you guys, a basic 3-fund strategy would be to pick a stock index fund, put 70% of your money in that, an international stock index fund, so you're investing in countries outside of the US, and then have 10% of your money in like a bond index fund. You can be more aggressive. You can say, I'm 22, I'm not going to put any of my money in bonds. Being aggressive when you're investing, especially when you're young, is great because you can afford to take advantage of the market and you can afford to just let it ride out if something happens. So right now the market's doing pretty good. If it were to drop, you might panic. But because you're 22, 23, you can afford to ride it out and wait for the market to recover. And one thing I want to reiterate is the market always recovers. MG and I basically lived through the Great Recession. The market bounced back. Like that was a really, really scary time period. But the market bounced back. And if you kept your money in the stock market, you would have seen really huge gains afterwards. The only way to lose money in the stock market, if you're investing in index funds, is to take your money out. Like to sell your shares, to close out your account. That is one of the, I feel like I keep saying this, it's one of the worst things you can do because you're essentially locking in your losses. Like a couple weeks ago, the S&P had hit a new high and I saw a number in my retirement account that I've never seen before. It was awesome and I felt really rich that day. And I think like 10 days later, it had kind of erased some of those gains and I was like, all right, well that's where it was. It's back to where it was 2 weeks earlier. That's fine because it's almost like play money. Like I don't have that money in my bank account. It's just sitting there in stocks. Now when I'm ready to retire, I'll probably sell a lot of those shares and put that in my checking account so it's actually like real money. But I always tell people, you have not lost money in the stock market until you actually sell those shares and you don't want to sell them when they're low. You just want to ride it out. And it's one of the hardest things for people to grasp because no one wants to feel like they've lost money, and no one wants to feel like they're doing poorly, but staying the course and being patient and kind of just like suffering when the stock market is down is a huge, huge part of why successful investors are successful. It's not because they're like better at picking stocks, it's because they can just have like the emotional maturity to just not touch their accounts. And I don't know if I should say this, but women are really, really good at it. We get less emotional when we invest, and we're actually better at like not letting our emotions dictate what we put money in. So it's a really great win for almost everyone in this room. So another popular thing, I'm just gonna touch on really quickly, is something called a target date fund. And if you have a 401k, they'll probably have a lot of target date fund options. What's really cool about a target date fund is that it basically tells you, if you're this age, choose me. And what it will do is it will pick the right index funds and the right like allocation based on how old you are. So I think like for MJ and I think like a 2055 target date fund would be appropriate because that's approximately the year we would hope to retire. So for you guys, 20, 65, 75, I keep doing math in my head. Let's see, like if you want to retire at 65, so like a 2065 target date fund would be appropriate. And what's really cool about target date funds, as you get older, they'll get more conservative, so they'll better align with your age. Some of the fees for target date funds are a little bit higher than if you just like pick the index funds yourself, but they're kind of a cool like crock pot set it and forget it option. I should be sponsored by Crockpot, I've used them like twice already. So that's another really popular option. And again, if you have a 401k, a target date fund might have fewer fees than other funds, but it really just depends on what your company offers. And some companies offer a really great variety of investing options in their 401k, and some companies don't. So it's just really specific to where you're working. Okay. I think I touched on compound interest earlier. This is how compound interest works. It's basically like earning interest on the principal, and then that interest becoming part of the principal, and you're generating more interest on the principal and the interest. So let's say you have $5,000 that's earning 7%. The first year you'll earn $350 in interest. So you'll have $5,350. But the next year, if you're still earning 7%, the interest is going to be calculated based on the $5,350, not the original $5,000. So you'll earn $374 in interest. So that bumps you up to $5,724. The best part of compound interest, and why I like talking about it with people who are young, is that it cares more about how much time you have in the market versus how much you're investing. So being young is the best thing when you're trying to invest, because compound interest, the math just, it benefits people who have more time. So, and that means like being 20, like you guys are in the perfect place to start investing and taking advantage of this. What I like to tell people is like the second part. Let's say you're 25, if you're investing $200 a month, 7% interest, you'll have about $225,000 in 30 years. If you wait 10 years, let's say you're 35 when you start investing, you'll have to contribute more than double that amount just to end up with the same at the end. That is really the biggest takeaway from compound interest, is that putting a little bit away now means that you won't have to put in that much later. So I know I said earlier, like, even if you can only afford to save like $50 a month, 25, that is better than nothing, because all of that will grow and earn interest. And also it'll get you in the habit of saying, okay, I might have this much money now, but then in a year I might have this much. And it's kind of like a little bit of a snowball effect, and it's just really motivating to see. So even if you can only afford to save like, again, $25 a month, that is better than nothing, and you're still gonna be better off than someone who waits. And also, I think when you decide, I'm gonna wait until I'm older, or I'm making this amount, there is no perfect time. Like, there's always something that you can be spending money on, whether that's a house, or kids, or projects, or vacations. Like, there's always something. Like, I don't know if you feel this way, I never feel like I have like enough money. Like, there's always something you can spend money on.
Oh my God.
Yeah. So, so it's just easier to get in the habit of it.
Can I just say too, like, I cannot stress enough how important it is for you guys to start now. That I know that Zena is sharing a lot of information, and it probably feels like it's foreign language, but I promise you that it is not. I did not go to school to be a finance major. I went to J school. And the very first thing that I did in my very first job was put aside 1%. And I'm gonna retire in 14 years, hopefully. That's the plan. Because I had my target date, right?
Yeah.
And it just, I cannot stress enough how important it is, truly. Especially, I mean, not to exclude Dalton, but especially for the women in here, to have financial independence is so, so, so important. So important. I hope that if you want to get married and live happily ever after, you do, but you might not, and you need to make sure that you have financial independence.
I will also say, on a very depressing note, if you get married and want to get divorced, you will need your own money. And financial, God, we're going down a really dark road, but I think we're all here for it. Financial abuse is very real, and having your own money, knowing how to manage your own money, knowing how all that works is so important. I've seen it with like friends and coworkers. Like, if you don't know how that works, you don't know, like, can I live alone? Can I be by myself? Can I figure things out? It's a really unspoken problem, but it's very real. And especially with the wage gap and everything, like, it's, when you have less money, it's even more important to know how to manage it. And that's not to put like more pressure on you guys, but I just want to empower you to all know, like, I went to J school. I did take a personal finance class in college because I thought it'd be fun. But also because I had this kind of sneaking suspicion that this is really important. No one is talking about it. If I'm going to be making journalist money, it's even more important to know how to manage it. If you're going to go and make $200,000 a year, you can be a little reckless and you'll probably still be okay. But when you have like limited means, it's even more important to know like what to do with it. And the best thing is that investing, like, you have to be a billionaire to get started. Like, you can get started with $5. And I've talked to people, I actually did a story, I'll have to find the link. One woman who said, I literally started investing with $5 a month. So that's all I could afford, but I wanted to feel like I was doing something. And then when I got more money, I put more money in. And it's really just about the habit. And I make a lot of references to, or a lot of metaphors about investing and exercise, but it's really similar. It's like the gains you might get at the gym, it's really similar to the gains you might get investing. And it sucks when you first start working out and you feel sore and crappy and tired and weak. But if you keep at it, then you just feel better and stronger and more empowered. And for me, it's like a perfect analogy.
I think the point about the $5 a month is really critical because I've had many, many, many conversations with students over the years who are saying, like, hey, they want to pay me $18 an hour to come and work for them. Can I work for that? You probably can't, right? Like, once you start doing the math. And so it might seem like you can't afford $5, but if you're thinking about it at the same time that you're ordering a tea at a Starbucks or something, like, take even that $3 or $4 and put that aside. And it might not seem like much, and I'm not saying like don't treat yourself to a tea from time to time because we all need those things, but even just one of those a month can make such a huge difference. And it seems insurmountable right now, that you might have some debt and things like that, and you're thinking, I'll never be able to buy a house. Okay, maybe you don't even want a house, I don't know. But I promise you the day is going to come when you are going to want to have your own money to be able to retire or to leverage it to do other things, which is a whole different conversation. But having that habit, and so I'm gonna take it even one step further, like, take $5 and invest it in your future, but then also take $5 a month and put it aside for when your car blows up, or when, you know, you have to get an emergency plane ticket somewhere, because those things happen too, and you don't want to or don't have the ability to put that on a credit card. Being able to pay for a car repair is not fun, but it changes everything about your world when you are able to pay for that. And you know that you have to take it out of savings, and yes, you might have to start over again, right? But you have the money to pay for it. The freedom that comes from that, I cannot stress enough.
That is, yeah, that's definitely a blind spot in this presentation, but I was like.
Oh, I don't think so at all.
No, I was like, I could teach a semester-long course on this.
Right.
That's the end of the official presentation, so now it's time for Q&A. Do you guys have questions? Oh, yeah.
Yeah, so what are like best practices for investing for medium-term goals, like a down payment on a house or something? Because I've seen like, you know, high yield savings accounts and other accounts that aren't necessarily tied to retirement.
Yes, that is a really great question. I like to think of investing as really only being appropriate for retirement, like putting money in the stock market, because you never know what might happen. Like we could have, like when COVID hit, like when COVID first hit, there was like huge stock market drop, and it recovered, and then we ended up going on an amazing bull run, but you just never know. So let's say in 5 years you want to buy a house or something. A high yield savings account is the best place to put it. Yes, you're not going to see the huge gains that you might get from a stock market, but your money's protected, it's secure, and hopefully if you did choose a high yield savings account versus like a regular savings account, you're going to see at least a decent interest rate. And again, interest rates also depend on factors outside of your control. But the best thing you can do is look at what interest rate am I getting now at my current bank, and what can I find a better interest rate elsewhere. So if you are banking at a place like Chase, Wells Fargo, your interest rate is probably lower than what you could be getting. I like to use Ally. I think Discover has a decent high yield savings account, Capital One. There may be some local credit unions. I haven't found any that are like as competitive. But I really like Ally. Like I think the rate on my savings account is 4.2. Chase probably pays, I think it's like less than 0.5% interest. And that adds up really quickly. And also the big banks, they often have more fees, and they're just not as easy to work with. And the best part is you don't actually have to pay money to get a higher interest rate with a high yield savings account. Like there's no, it's almost like, where's the catch? There is no catch. That's a really good question.
Find out too, like, I don't know if you're in your family, if you have any teachers, or if you have anybody in your family, like grandparents or parents that were in the military, because USAA has a bank that can be an option for dependents of military people, and you don't even have to be a dependent. Like if your granddad or somebody like that was in the service, it counts. You just have to show proof of service. So that can be, and teachers union, like credit unions sometimes can, but it depends too on what the